Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to welcome somebody that's proper clever, who actually knows what he's talking about. Not me, talking about stuff I've read, talking about somebody that actually knows. So ladies and gentlemen, can you please make lots of noise, make a Merseyside, Liverpool, cheering, laughter and clapping and all kinds of noise for Professor Bentall about democracy. Give a big round of applause, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Can people hear me? Okay. Right, it's a huge privilege to be here today and to be asked to talk. I'm actually going to talk about the threat to our democracy. I should say, this is in fact the first political speech in my life.
Yes.
I'm a scientist by training. I'm used to standing up in front of academics and other professors, and to be honest, compared to that, this feels, in a way, bloody terrifying. But I'm here today because I've got to be here today. I've got to be here today to warn you about the danger, the very great danger which is facing this country. When I speak about this danger, I'm going to say something about our past. I'm going to say something about our present, and I'm going to say something about our possible futures. In what follows, like other people before me today, I'm afraid I will be using the F word here and there, because at this moment in this country, a dark spectre is rising above us, a spectre which we thought had been slain. And that spectre is fascism. So first, a bit about our past. 75 years ago this year, our grandparents defeated a great evil that consumed the planet in flames. In May of 1945, Germany surrendered. And then in August of the same year, after 2 atomic weapons were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan capitulated. Estimates of the number of people who died in that conflict vary, but they're generally thought to be around 60 million people. That's 60 million people who died, of which about 3/4 were actually civilians, and only about 1/4 were military personnel. At the war's conclusion, the British men and women who took part believed that they had killed off fascism forever. Overwhelmingly, they look forward to a peaceful and prosperous future. In the general election of July 1945, they voted in their droves to reject the undoubtedly still respected wartime leader Winston Churchill, and instead elected a Labour government led by Clem Attlee, which promised to deliver the welfare state foreshadowed in the Beveridge Report of 1942. Now, I'm sure you're aware that the welfare state was not the only progressive consequences born out of the ashes of Europe. I actually once knew an RAF Bomber Command Pathfinder pilot who flew many missions over Germany. He was actually the second youngest wing commander in the RAF, and he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross twice for bravery. Before he died, he told me, in a sort of slightly kind of reluctant, sort of hesitant sort of way, that he supported Britain's membership of the European Union. Why? Because he'd seen that the alternative was misery and death. Edward Heath, for example, took the same view. Apparently, he found himself at the age of 19 trying to kill other 19-year-olds and thinking, there's got to be a better way. Similarly, Churchill, towards the end of his life, advocated a United States of Europe. The European Economic Community, which was the forerunner of the EU, was therefore conceived explicitly as a peace-promoting project, on the theory that nations that trade together rarely go to war. By that standard, at least, it has been an extraordinary success. We are now living through the longest period of European peace ever. No country which is a member of the European Union has ever gone to war with a member state of the European Union. And by the way, I'm frequently told by Brexiteers that this is due to NATO. It's not. NATO was not about preventing war between member states. In fact, two member states of NATO, Greece and Turkey, have gone to war with each other since joining that alliance. So it's ironic, really, that the door to fascism has been opened, not in continental Europe, but in this country today, by our exit from the European Union. So I'll now talk about our near past and our present. It's a tragedy to recall that in 2012, we proudly hosted the Olympic Games. In the opening ceremony, designed by the film director Danny Boyle, Britain was portrayed as a diverse, multicultural and outgoing country. Something has clearly gone badly wrong in the intervening years. You may think that using the word fascism in this context is hyperbole, but it's not, for reasons which I will explain. When I use the word fascism, I'm not thinking of men in jackets. George Orwell, in The Road to Wigan Pier, said, "English fascism, when it arrives, is likely to be a sedate and rather subtle affair. At first, at any rate, it will not be called fascism." In fact, it has always been thus. Fascism was delivered in Germany democratically by voters who voted for Hitler and who won over him not by the promise of concentration camps, but by the promise to make the country great again, to reject international treaties. In Hitler's case, it was the membership of the League of Nations that he wanted to reject, and to keep out migrants. In short, he promised to take back control. Like it or not, Brexit was delivered on exactly the same promises, and it takes an extraordinary Brinkley view of history not to see it. What is fascism? At the core of fascist ideology is nationalism, which is very often mistaken for patriotism. It's in fact a very different thing. A patriot loves his country, recognises faults and strives to make it better. A nationalist, by contrast, sees his own country as being in perpetual opposition to other countries, which he denigrates and seeks to dominate either economically or militarily. This way of thinking is easily exploited by demagogues. Now a bit of psychology, I'm afraid I am a psychologist. We know from psychological research that human beings have a basic evolutionary need to belong to powerful groups. In the past, those groups have been villages, tribes, cultures, religions. The nation state, as we understand it today, is in fact quite a recent invention. You could argue about when it began, but there's a plausible case that you could say it began in the Napoleonic period, the modern state as we know it. With its flags and national anthems, it has proved to be a potent means of channeling these fundamental human emotions, this need to belong. These emotions are not always bad. They can, for example, lead us to care for those who are close to us. But they can be easily manipulated to provoke hatred and violence towards those outside our group. The hallmark of nationalism is exceptionalism. The belief that one's nation is somehow eternal and exceptional. When we hear the song, "There Will Always Be a England," we forget that in reality Great Britain has only lasted since 1706, the Act of Union, roughly about 300 years, less time than the lifespan of the Kingdom of Wessex. When we're told that Britain can be global Britain, we forget that Germany, Japan, France, and many other countries have equal claim to be global. We forget that we are a modestly sized country that is modestly rich. Nationalists like to claim that in terms of GDP, we are the 6th richest country in the world, but that is an entirely misleading figure. The correct way of measuring wealth is per capita GDP. And on that measure, we come about 30th. We are a modestly sized country, modestly wealthy. Because fascism thrives on nationalism, it needs to explain why a country that should be great isn't great. Scapegoats are therefore an essential part of fascist ideology. Hitler was fortunate, and the rest of us were very unfortunate, that he had a ready scapegoat to hand. That scapegoat were the Jews and communists who were blamed for Germany's defeat in 1918. Today, in the mythology surrounding Brexit, the European Union, of course, is itself the scapegoat. We are told that it has consumed vast amounts of British taxpayer money, that it's shackled us with all sorts of ridiculous laws, limiting, for example, the power of our vacuum cleaners and the bendiness of our bananas. None of these things are true. In reality, when you do the accounting properly, it turns out that every member state of the European Union received more back than it paid in. You might not think that's possible, but if you take into account the indirect benefits, it is true. Every member state received more money back than it paid to Brussels. The vacuum cleaner regulation was actually suggested by the British government to Brussels as an environmentally friendly measure. And the curviness of banana story was invented by an imaginative Daily Telegraph columnist you may have heard of by the name of Boris Johnson. I'm now going to make a confession. It may shock you to learn that I was actually once a young conservative. I know. I came from a family of middle-class conservative activists, so when I was at school, I followed in their footsteps. That was before I went to university and learned better ways. Ironically, it was as a young conservative that I campaigned in the referendum of 1975 for Britain to retain its membership of the European Economic Community. And to be fair on myself, the Tory party from that period, before Thatcher, was not all bad. It had a number of values which most of us today can actually relate to. It believed in respect for traditions, a kind of patrician approach to caring for people less fortunate, the upholding of democracy, and the importance of honesty and truth-telling, values which were beaten into many Tory MPs by their headmasters in their English public schools. It will not surprise you if I tell you that that Tory party no longer exists. What remains is a hollow skin, superficially resembling the old Tory party, but hollowed out and eaten from the inside by vampires. Fascism finds its way to power by capturing conservative elements within the population. Without the cooperation of conservatives in Germany in the 1920s, Hitler would never have become Chancellor. And the same is true today. In order to ensure electoral victory in 2015 and 19, the British Conservative Party has increasingly pandered to extremists from the British National Party and the Brexit Party, to the point where they have now become indistinguishable from them. Anyone explicitly avowing old Tory values, the Heseltines, the Solmses, the Gorks and the Greaves, have been purged. What remains is a gang of psychopaths. I use that word carefully. I am a psychologist. I know what a psychopath is, and I can tell you many of them are actual psychopaths. They care about nothing other than clinging to power. That's all they want. And in clinging to power, they have chosen to follow the same old fascist rulebook. They lie to us, to our faces, day after day. Even when they know that they're lying, we know that they're lying, and they know that we know that they're lying, they lie to us anyway. Remarkably, this was actually foreseen, this is incredible but true, by no less a figure than Joseph Goebbels, who in 1941 wrote, "The essential English leadership secret does not depend on intelligence." How true that turned out to be. The English follow the principle that when one lies, one should lie big and stick to it. They keep up their lies even at the risk of looking ridiculous. The fascist, of course, seeks to inflame nationalist emotions by directing fear and hatred towards the other. I don't have to tell you how that worked out in Germany. Today, we see an endless stream of propaganda about what in reality is a small number of desperate refugees crossing the English Channel. While Farage posts videos of what, using inflammatory language he calls an invasion from the beaches of Kent, Paul Golding and his thugs from Britain First are breaking into hotels where refugees are being temporarily housed to threaten them. And Priti Patel, following the racist dog whistle, is ramping up deportation flights. The fascist rages against anyone who has the potential to constrain his actions. Potentially embarrassing reports by intelligence services about foreign interference in our democratic process are suppressed. The civil service is in the process of being dismantled. Its senior civil servants cold. The judiciary is being attacked and cowed. Our right-wing press labels our judges as enemies of the people. Anyone using the law to defend the human rights of migrants is held down as an activist lawyer, as if you'd like to have an unactive lawyer to look after your interests. Legislation is being planned to limit judicial review so that the government is no longer accountable to the law. And of course, any government that thinks it is above the law inevitably believes that it can do what the fuck it wants. It can take huge sums from Russian donors and even appoint one of them with plausible connections to the old KGB to the House of Lords. It can trash the Constitution by proroguing Parliament to lock out MPs and to stop them from scrutinising their actions. It can take bribes from billionaire property developers with impunity, and it can use the excuse of the coronavirus pandemic to drag rivers of money into the pockets of their cronies in shabby backroom deals for PPE and ferries that either are not fit for purpose or actually don't even exist. Which brings me to our possible future. In case there's any doubt, I'm not saying that Britain today is a fascist state. But under the new revolutionary Conservative Party, Britain has taken the first steps down the road that ends in fascism. And some kind of fascism is one of our possible futures. Am I saying that I expect some kind of sudden suspension of the normal democratic process? It's not impossible, but probably not. But it's important to remember that fascism historically has always been delivered by the democratic process. Fascism is introduced step by step by a willing population who doesn't notice what is happening until it is too late. Am I saying that the 14 million people who voted Tory in 2019 were fascists or fascist sympathisers? Of course they were. Many of them are ordinary, decent people, just as many of the people who mistakenly voted for Hitler, many of the 17 million people who mistakenly voted for Hitler in 1933, were actually, strange though it may seem, ordinary, decent Germans who just wanted to make Germany great again. What I'm saying is that seeds of fascism have been sown in this country on these shores, and we must worry about what lies ahead. At some point, early next year, in January probably, the Brexit juggernaut to which the Conservative Party has tied its fortunes will hit the rocks, and the consequences will be catastrophic, particularly if this coincides with a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. And the scientists I know who are working on coronavirus tell me that it's very possible, by the way. And if there's a spike of unemployment as a consequence of the first wave. Even if Britain does a minimal deal with the European Union, the government will be spending, this is incredible to say, the government is spending billions of pounds to create processes which will make it more difficult and more expensive for us to trade with our nearest and largest trading partners. There are likely to be vast queues of lorries at the border. You will actually need a permit just to take a lorry into Kent. Revenue streams for industry and agriculture are likely to dry up. The pound will fall and the prices in the supermarkets will rise. What will the Conservative Party do at that point? That's what you need to ask yourself. What will they do at that point? Do you think they're going to come in front of you and say something like, "Sorry guys, we made a big mistake"? I think not. More likely, they will go further down the authoritarian, xenophobic and totalitarian path, step by step, until we arrive at fascism. And you need to ask yourselves what you will do when that happens. I saw a Twitter thing recently, which you've probably seen yourself. If you're wondering what you would do if you're in 1930s Germany, you're doing it now. I want to finish this rant, with a quote from the Yale University historian Timothy Schneider. Schneider's short book, actually it's more like a pamphlet, on tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century, is essential reading for anyone who is an opponent of fascism. Schneider says, democracy failed in Europe in the 1920s, 1930s and 1940s, and it is failing not only in Europe, but in many parts of the world today. It is that history and experience that reveals to us the dark range of our possible futures. A nationalist says it can't happen here, which is the first step towards disaster. A patriot says that it could happen here, and we will stop it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Professor. Professor Bentall. I love listening to people that know what they're talking about. And that's the thing. You might hear something and you need information. You go to an expert, you go to a scientist, you go to a psychology professor. Ladies and gentlemen,